Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am delighted to welcome back one of the foremost experts on fascism, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth, welcome.
So nice to be speaking with you, Jen.
I always turn to you for a big picture assessment so we can figure out not just what one particular president is doing in the moment, but to fit this within the context of what other authoritarian leaders do or try to do. One thing that Trump has clearly decided to do is use the military in ways in which no other president has. Talk to us a little bit about how dictators use the military, why it's important for them to use this, and what this does to the population to see military deployed domestically.
Yeah, thanks. So there's, there are obviously military dictatorships. So the case study in my book, Strongmen, is Pinochet, where there you have a military takeover, you have tanks in the streets, you have a coup. But all authoritarians have to make the military into a prop for their personal, domination and glory agendas. And so we just had a military parade in China, which was doing many things. It was showing a perfectly orchestrated institution under the command of Xi. It was showing off, new weapons that could be used against Taiwan. So it was a pageant of glorification. Here's what the leader is doing, and also a warning. So that's something that they all do. In reality, what they often do is wreck their militaries, as happened with Russia's at the beginning when Putin first invaded Ukraine. The world was exposed to the corruption and the total lack of mission and morale among officers and troops because of the kleptocracy. And what they actually often do is siphon expertise. They surround themselves with loyalists, sycophants. And so even the military is not untouched by this. So they often ruin the integrity of militaries.
And we see a parallel there with Hegseth and the people he has hired and the people he has dismissed. Is that because ultimately loyalty becomes the most important quality? And when you have people who loyalty is the most important quality, they are people who don't care about professional standards, truth, professionalism?
Yes, and obviously in the case of the military, where you have life and death situations for the members of the military, and not speaking about what they can do to domestic and other enemies, it's absolutely key. And so what we've seen is purges in the military, and putting somebody there who's completely inexperienced and unqualified. I wrote an essay for my Substack Lucid before Trump administration started. So this was before he came into office, about Hegseth, because he was being discussed at the time, called "This is engineered incompetence." And so you put a loyalist who really is there over his head into a very important position, so that person cannot be too independent, and they are your personal tool. And so that's happened. The military is also happening with the FBI, and now there's there's some incompetence being shown to the public there. And so, but for Trump, who's a man of spectacle, of authority, he understands authoritarian and other spectacle. Having the military and National Guard and kind of what's called a broad state security forces in the streets of American cities, democratic cities, is part of habituating Americans to see the military in domestic roles as normal, trying to familiarize and habituate Americans to accepting this. And Trump is brilliant at this. He does the drip, 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 not only with words, but with images as well.
And that brings us to another sort of political force, and that is the way he is using ICE. They are a federal force, so he legally has control over them, but he's using them in ways in which other presidents have not, and their conduct is unlike anything we've seen before. The masks, the lack of identification, the physical violence, and then the building of these camps. What is that about in the scheme and in the pageantry and the symbolism of authoritarians?
Honestly, it's reminding me a lot about Italian fascism, which we never know enough about. We always think about Hitler, and the way that Mussolini not only came to power with these black shirts, who were encouraged to customize. They had the black shirt on, but they customized their attire. They used violence. They operated in small bands. They went into cities and wrecked, disappeared people. And then when he became prime minister and before the dictatorship, he created a militia that was loyal to him under his control, because at the time the armed forces of Italy was under control of the king. And after the dictatorship started, this militia that was personally loyal to him operated as his personal, very large task force. And even when we get to World War II, they did some of the worst war crimes. So they were within lawless fascism. They were personally responsible to Mussolini and had no limits on what they could do. So I see Trump using ICE in the same way, that they're recruiting people who will be comfortable with the lawless environment. Being masked, adds anonymity. They also are encouraged to show tattoos and look threatening. There's a lot of personalization of attire, and they're doing things that were red flags or third rails of American democracy before. So only certain type of people want to do this. And so that's how I see Trump using them as his personally, a militia personally loyal to him.
He has also singled out one particular group of undocumented immigrants. You don't see him going into Asian American neighborhoods looking for people who have overstayed their visas, to use one contrast. And he's going back to a group that he has continued to demonize. How common is that in the history of fascism and authoritarianism?
So today, although we still have coups in the world, today authoritarians come to power via elections, as Trump did. And honestly, it makes me very sad. And you and I were warning about this all through the campaign, that the fact we have troops in the streets now was previewed by Trump himself for us, who he talked about liberating cities that were occupied in the heartland. And who were they occupied by? Was not only foreign drug gangs and terrorists, but immigrants who were part of this murky swamp that would be liberated. And he spoke of the American heartland, American cities, as though they were Iraq. And this was all going on during the campaign, as well as the rallies we will all remember, where people held up signs that said mass deportation. And then there was the dehumanizing of immigrants, the whole thing about them eating cats and dogs, where they're vermin, and all of that classic arsenal of rhetorical dehumanization. He was not yet in power, so that's all he could do. But that psychologically prepared people. All the things he did during the campaign, which I've mentioned, were psychologically preparing people for the policies that Stephen Miller and other, evil minds who stay up at night trying to figure out new ways to harm people. They feature always in authoritarianism, and Hannah Arendt called people like Stephen Miller desk killers. She was referring to the Nazis, of course, but these are people they had projects that were very defined of what they would do if they got back into power, but they needed to prepare Americans psychologically, emotionally for this. And that's what all of this was about.
One of the things that we have sadly seen, and you talk about this in your book, is the degree to which elite institutions, universities, law firms have, and most importantly, large businesses capitulate, that they try to cut deals, they try to appease. we've seen a mixed pattern in America. A lot have, and some haven't. Why do these people who have more power continue to bend the knee? Why are the people who are best able to resist the first to fall in line?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We just had the dispiriting spectacle, the latest in a series of many of the tech leaders, because they feel they have the most to lose. But this goes back, again, all the way to Mussolini, that authoritarians make what's called authoritarian bargains with elites, media elites, financial elites, religious elites, and those are the people who have the most to lose if they become an enemy of the state, if they are seen as disloyal, and the authoritarian tells them that they will have the most to gain by partnering. And what the partnering means is that you show up. It's exactly what we're seeing paraded about on our screens. That you show up, you humor the leader, you, as Tim Cook did, you thank him effusively, you perform your own humiliation. That's what these types of men like Trump need, is to humiliate other people. And sometimes you change the policies of your company, and this depends on the degree of dictatorship of which the country arrives at. But you also never criticize, no matter what is happening. You don't criticize, and this is why it's very sad. Once these bargains are struck, it takes an awful lot for them to be rescinded. And that without these elites, there's tons of studies on this. Authoritarians, especially today where they still have elections, would not stay in power for long.
Yeah. And last question for you, Ruth. Despite the behavior of elites and an entire political party, we haven't talked much about Republicans who have simply given up
Yeah.
their any principles they once had and are now just part of this cult of personality. The public at large still does seem to be pushing back. We have seen large protests, much larger than 2017. And we see smaller acts of resistance, people returning their Teslas and other acts of refusal to capitulate. Does that give you hope that the beating heart of America is still there, that there is still time to draw on American sense of fairness, decency, democracy?
Yeah, it's very important to never lose hope. If you lose hope that you can affect change, that collectively change can be affected, then you've really given in to authoritarians who want you to feel fatalistic at their omnipotence. And the other thing I'd say is no country ever, especially when the size and complexity of the US, ever constructed a big tent pro-democracy movement in a matter of months. And
Mm.
now you could counter that by saying, well, things are moving so fast. And indeed, in my estimation, the pace of change and
Yeah.
demise of democracy does not resemble any other leader who came in via election. If you look at the first 9 months of Putin or Erdogan or Orban, it doesn't resemble this. This is like after a coup or a revolution. And they were there in power before, so they were ready, right? But we have to, so on the other hand, we have to be patient and not give into despair because we don't see a fully formed mass pro-democracy movement. What's important is that each action, whether it's hands off in April or no kings, the numbers have grown. And we also see, and this is very important, at the local level, citizens coming out spontaneously to try and stop ICE from taking people away. And they've been successful. They've turned back people in Maine and California. And this is resistance. This is very important. And so I think that in the United States, resistance is also going to be decentralized and to some extent leaderless. That's one of the directions of the future of resistance. It's not going to look like maybe European countries where you have a mediagenic, everybody comes to the Capitol and you have a huge mass march. That may not be the case in America, but it's still resistance that's building.
That is fascinating. Ruth, you are always a wealth of information and the much needed perspective we live in. So we will look forward to seeing you again. And contrarians, you have another opportunity, No King's Day 2, which is coming up on October 18th. So thank you so much, Ruth. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.